Hello, I'm Anemika from the Leyden University Medical Center, and I'm very sorry I cannot be with you in person, but I'm also happy to present in this way online. So today's topic is the future of genetic therapies, and I will go over both opportunities and challenges of genetic therapies. But before we go into that, a very brief recap of what happens if you have Duchenne. There is no dystrophin, and normally dystrophin stabilizes muscle fibers during contraction. If there is no dystrophin, this means that muscle fibers are continuously damaged, and that leads to chronic inflammation, scar tissue formation, so fibrosis and adipose tissues are deposited, and limited regeneration because repair is impaired, and consequently a loss of muscle tissue and a loss of muscle function. And I'm stressing this because it will come back at the end of the presentation. Now, because all these pathways arise because there is no dystrophin, an obvious therapeutic approach is to restore dystrophin. And this can be done in different ways. And the approaches I will discuss here are gene therapy, exon skipping, and genome editing. And I will briefly outline how they work, what the current situation is and the challenges, and then the obvious future directions. Starting with gene therapy. So the rationale of gene therapy is that Duchenne patients cannot make dystrophin because the gene is not functional. What if we provide a functional copy of the dystrophin gene to muscles? Then with that, patients could make a functional dystrophin. The idea, however, is to deliver this to all the muscles in the body, and we have over 700 muscles, and not just to one muscle fibers, but to the majority of muscle fibers. So you need a delivery vehicle. And usually people use viral vectors for this because viruses are very efficient in delivering their genetic contents to cells. Well, muscle is not the best target for viral delivery, and there's actually only one virus that can really efficiently infect muscle. That is the adeno-associated virus, or AAV. So that one is used to deliver genes to muscle for muscle diseases, and in the case of Duchenne, to deliver dystrophin to muscles. Because AAV is a virus that also occurs in nature, many of us have encountered it, and about 50% of adults have had an infection with AAV. You don't get sick, but still you have an immune response. And that means if you then come back with gene therapy with AAV, that would result in a massive immune response. It would break down the virus that you use to deliver dystrophin, but it probably will also be lethal just because the extent of the immune response. So it's very important to check whether patients have had an exposure to AAV in the past or not. And if they had, they cannot participate in clinical trials with AAV gene therapy, but also if the approach would be approved at some point, for now, they cannot get treated with this. So that is important to bear in mind. A second aspect is that AAV is very small. And the reason that it can infect muscles so well is that it is small. However, because it's small, only small genes fit. And dystrophin, as you probably know, is one of the largest genes that we have. So to make sure that the dystrophin fits, we have had to minimize the dystrophin gene and generate a microdystrophin. And a microdystrophin has the two crucial parts of dystrophin and a little bit of a stuffer sequence in between. It has a volume switch, so it's only produced in muscle, and it has some viral sequences because otherwise it would not go into the virus particles. So on this slide, just to give you some idea of how small the microdystrophin is. So this is the full length dystrophin, and you can see, well, it has the two crucial domains here at the beginning and here at the end, indicated with these two click domains in the carabiner. And then normally it has this repeat domain that contains 24 repeats. So this elastic part in the middle. And what you can see is that these microdystrophin have only 4 or 5 of these repeats and a few of these hinges. So it's much shorter. So again, it's a carabiner, but now the elastic domain is much, much shorter. And different companies use different microdystrophins. You can see Solid uses this one, Pfizer uses this one, Sarepta uses this one. Whether each of them is functional and whether some are more functional than others, we do not know yet. In animal models, they are all functional, but of course, mice and dogs are not humans. So what is the current state of the art? So there's clinical trials ongoing by the different companies, and they only include patients who've not had exposure to the different types of AAV that the different companies use, as I explained 2 slides ago. About 100 Duchenne patients have now been treated with AAV gene therapy, microdystrophin gene therapy, and from this we have some general conclusions. So we know that with AAV microdystrophin gene therapy, it is possible to achieve microdystrophin expression in the majority of muscles. So up to 80% of the fibers start to make microdystrophin and up to 74% of total normal dystrophin protein. So that is quite efficient. However, there's also side effects, and these can be severe to very severe, and sadly 1 patient died so far achieving microdystrophin gene therapy. And the severity of the side effects is related to the dose. So the higher the dose, the more severe the side effects are. However, if you want these high levels, the 80% of fibers making up to 74% of dystrophin, you also need a higher dose, because with lower doses, then you're more in the 5% of fibers making about 1 to 5% of dystrophin. So you need the high dose to achieve good dystrophin levels, but with the high dose is also the risk of more severe side effects. And what we also have learned is that the severity of the side effects are age-related. So the older you are, the more mature your immune system is, and most of these side effects are related to the immune response. And the sad case of the patient who passed away, that was a 16-year-old Duchenne patient and one of the oldest patients treated with AAV gene therapy so far. So that is something that we know. Now, focusing a little bit more on these side effects, there's a second thing that we know, and that is that side effects can either be acute, so shortly after the gene therapy has been delivered. And the side effects are nausea, so severe nausea can even lead to dehydration, liver damage, temporary kidney failure, sepsis, and as I mentioned, even death. But this happens days to a few weeks after the treatment. But what can also happen is later side effects. And these are different types. So this is muscle breakdown, rhabdomyolysis, and myocarditis, so an inflammation of the heart. And this is due to an immune response to microdystrophin, and it's only seen with patients with a large deletion located at the beginning of the gene. So how come only these patients have this immune response, and why do they have this immune response at all? Well, something about the immune system reacts to foreign proteins, so proteins that the immune system has not seen yet. And of course, Duchenne patients don't make dystrophin. So you would think that for all patients, all Duchenne patients, the microdystrophin would trigger an immune response, because normally they don't make dystrophin. However, most Duchenne patients actually do make parts of the dystrophin. So again, if we have the full-length dystrophin here with the 2 click domains, most patients will have a mutation somewhere here in this elastic repeat domain. So that means that this piece with the crucial domain here and part of the elastic domain, this piece they can make. It's not functional, it's not productive, it's not stable. However, they do make it, so the immune system will recognize this is normal. There's also shorter forms of dystrophin, and usually these contain only the last part of the dystrophin. And because most patients have a mutation here, most patients can make these shorter dystrophin. So again, this is a part of the protein that the immune system recognizes. Now with the microdystrophin, as you see here, so most patients will make this part and that part, and then there's the repeat part. Well, it's a repeat, so something similar has been seen by the immune response. Now for patients with a very large deletion at the beginning of the gene, they will miss this part. So they cannot produce this part. And now suddenly, if you have a microdystrophin that contains this domain at the beginning, this will be seen as a new protein, as a foreign protein. So the immune system thinks this is an invasion, this is a foreign entity, a foreign organism, and it will attack the cells expressing this protein. And then, of course, is a microdystrophin, which is expressed in the muscles and the heart. So it will start attacking the muscles and the heart, and then, of course, the microdystrophin expression will stop. So that is not a good thing, combined with the fact that this massive muscle breakdown and cardiomyocytitis, myocarditis is a severe condition that can lead to death. So far, none of these patients have passed away, fortunately, but it's a very severe side effect. So that is one of the challenges, but there's more challenges in the microdystrophin gene therapy approach. What we know is that the microdystrophins are functional in mice and dogs. What we don't know yet is whether they're functional in humans. And of course, mice and dogs walk on 4 legs, humans on 2. So the dynamics and the forces that are involved are different. Placebo-controlled trials are ongoing, and these will really reveal whether the microdystrophin treatment can slow down disease progression. What we do know is that the microdystrophins will not be expressed forever because they're not fully normal dystrophins, they're partially functional dystrophins. So with time, the muscle will still break down. It will go slower than if you have no dystrophin, but there will still be breakdown of muscle tissues. And that means that at some point you will lose your microdystrophin because, well, you get more and more loss of microdystrophin genes. And the question is, how long will that take? Will it take a few years or will it take decades? And well, of course, if it takes decades, it's less of a problem than if it takes 2 or 3 years. Because if you say, well, but then you can treat again with the microdystrophin. No, you can't, because by the time you've given the microdystrophin, for sure there will be an immune response to the AAV. And again, bear in mind that if you have had exposure to AAV, you're not eligible for gene therapy. So this is not something that would benefit all patients because there's a significant part of patients excluded because they have already an immune response to AAV and then AAV cannot be used. And I also mentioned that the immune response to the microdystrophin is a problem because now selective mutations, so patients with this deletion at the beginning of the gene, they are no longer eligible for gene therapy because the risk of them developing this severe side effect where muscle is broken down, where the heart is infected, that side effect is too severe. So these patients are for now excluded from these gene therapies. So towards the future, what do we need as a field? What do we need to optimize? We need to optimize delivery. And of course, AAV can go to muscle. However, if it could go to muscle more efficiently, and if it could go to muscle more than it goes to liver, because a large amount also goes to liver, that would allow us to use a lower dose. I mentioned already, lower doses are associated with less side effects. So this would be safer, and then hopefully, of course, still achieve a very high level of positive fibers with high levels of microdystrophin expression. People are also looking into other ways, like not the virus, because most of the side effects are due to the use of the virus. And one approach is using nanoparticles. And usually these are lipids that are then complexed with DNA or RNA. However, this works great for the liver, but so far not at all for muscles. And if you want to repeat the treatment, so it turns out that you would have to repeat the treatment every 5 years or every 10 years, there's now development of different types of AAV, so that well, you can treat with one type the first time, and if you need to repeat, you will repeat with the second type, so that you don't get this massive immune response. And with nanoparticles, it would be possible to repeat the treatment, but for now, that's not really an option because the nanoparticles do not work at all. So moving on to the second part, which is exon skipping. And I'll very briefly explain. So the idea of exon skipping is to restore the genetic code. We see here an example of patients with the deletion of exon 48 to 50. 47 doesn't fit to exon 51. So that means the code is restored and translation stops, and you get only the beginning of the protein, which is not functional. However, if 47 would be linked to 52, the code would be restored because 47 fits to 52. And then the translation would go from start to finish. The central domain would be missing, so the protein would be slightly shorter, but the crucial domains at the beginning and the end of the proteins are there. Now, how can we manage the cell to bypass this exon 51? We can do that by hiding it from the splicing machinery that connects all these exons. And we do that with antisense oligonucleotides or AONs, small pieces of modified RNA that specifically bind, in this case, to exon 51, and then allow the production of a Becker-like dystrophin. Well, I mentioned this is targeting exon 51. However, this is mutation specific. So depending on which mutation you have, you either need to target exon 51, 45, 53, etc. And the list stops here at exon 8, but it's much, much, much longer. And you can see the subgroups of patients goes down significantly with each continuous exon. Currently, the focus mostly is on developing ASOs for exon 51 and 53, and there's one for 45. However, this applies to about 30% of patients, but not to 70% of patients. So that's something to bear in mind. This applies only to subgroups. So where are we at now? There's 4 AONs approved, 1 for exon 51, 2 for exon 53, and 1 for exon 45. And that applies to about 30%, as I just mentioned. The approval is based only on the ability of the AONs to restore dystrophin at very low levels. And for 3 out of the 4 AONs, these levels are less than 1% of normal. So that is really quite low. And then the question is, are these low levels enough to slow down disease progression? We don't know that yet. There are studies ongoing to test that. But what is clear is that there's room for improvement. And there's currently 2 bottlenecks, the applicability. So you need to develop different AONs for different exons. I will not go into that, but I will stress that this is really currently a challenge, because you will see in the next slides, most companies are focusing on exon 51 or 53. And not on the other exons that would apply to other groups that currently have no treatment at all. So that is something that well, hopefully will change in the future, where instead of focusing on exons where already there is an approved AON, companies will start to also develop things for additional exons. The bottleneck that I will discuss is delivery to muscle and heart. So why are these AONs so inefficient? Because the uptake by muscle and heart is very, very poor. So how can we improve this? Well, first of all, we can conjugate a compound to the AON to increase general uptake. And I used here the picture of a drill, because this is not specific. This just bores holes in cells, and then you get better uptake of the AONs. It's not just in muscle, it's in all the different tissues. And then, of course, the question is, well, if you do that, how safe is that? Well, that we know for sure. Safety is an issue. What we've seen in 2 of the compounds that are currently in clinical trial with these conjugates is hypomagnesemia. So that means the blood levels of magnesium are too low. And why are they too low? Probably because patients excreted in their urine high amounts of magnesium. And so the hypomagnesemia can lead to clinical problems like heart rhythm failures. However, it can also be a sign of kidney problems, because normally the kidney reabsorbs the magnesium from the urine. And if it doesn't do that very well, that's a sign that something is wrong and that there may be damage. That aside, so there's currently 3 companies that use this approach. Sarepta with the SRP-5051, which is their approved 51 AON linked to a conjugate. PepGen has an exon 51 conjugate, and Entrada has a slightly different conjugate, so they made it cyclic, and they hope that means it's less toxic. And they target exon 44, so they are the only company that says, okay, we're going to target an exon for which there is currently no approved treatment. Whether they're safe, we will have to wait and see. But sadly, at least for the ones developed by Sarepta and by PepGen, there's this hypomagnesemia problem, and we have to wait and see whether that is so severe that the development has to stop, or whether it's tolerated and the development can continue. Well, this was a general increase in uptake. It's also possible to increase the delivery to muscle specifically. And that can be done by linking the AON to an antibody that targets the transferrin receptor. And transferrin is highly expressed, so it's like adding an address to the AON so that it goes to the muscle. And there's two companies working on this, Dyne and Avidity. Dyne, again, targeting exon 51, Avidity, like Entrada, going for exon 44, so a new target. There are, however, some challenges. So Dyne's clinical trial has recently started. Avidity is still planning their trial, but there are challenges also for this because the antibody is much bigger than this small peptide that is not specific. And that means there can be antibodies against the antibody because that is what the immune system does. It can recognize this as a foreign protein. While transferrin is expressed on muscle, it's also expressed on liver and brain. So it might not be as specific as we want. And also because this antibody is quite big, manufacturing is more challenging. However, if something works, then people will find ways to improve the manufacturing. The oligonucleotide manufacturing used to be challenging as well. And now that it's a more established modality, the manufacturing has improved. So I don't think this is the major problems, but the other two may be challenges, and we'll have to wait and see. And then one final approach that people are using is to use gene therapy to achieve exon skipping. So rather than delivering a microdystrophin gene, they deliver a gene that can increase or induce exon skipping. And that's called the U7 snRNA system. And Kevin Flanagan has developed this for exon 2 duplications. Audentes and Astellas were developing it for exon 51, 53, and 45, but they stopped that development because they prioritized other gene therapy products for other muscle diseases. So hopefully others will pick up on this and fill this gap. The exon 2 duplication seems to work. I mean, the treated patients start to produce dystrophin at different levels, but this approach would or does result in larger amounts of exon skipping. However, it's an AAV approach. So all the challenges for safety and production of AAV still apply. So this is the risks that apply to the AAV also apply to this approach. Then the last approach is genome editing. And what genome editing does, and I'm sure you've heard about genome editing in the media, genome editing allows us to make targeted cuts in the DNA. And it's basically a DNA scissor with a GPS to tell the scissor where to cut. And mostly the scissor listens and cuts where it's supposed to cut, but sometimes it will also cut at other locations where you don't want it to cut. So that is something to bear in mind. Now, why would you want to cut the DNA? The DNA contains our genetic material. It's really important that this is not cut. You cut it because if you induce a double-stranded break, a cut in the DNA, that will activate the repair system. And there is a very efficient repair system in dividing cells. However, muscle cells are not dividing. So we can't have this copy and paste errorless repair. We're stuck with the non-homologous end joining, as it's called. This is the glue system. So the two pieces are just glued together. And whatever was lost because there was a cut is lost. And if there's DNA building blocks floating around here, they may be included here because the repair system, if you're here in the DNA building block, you probably were part of what originally was there. So this increase or induces mistakes. However, so mistake, you don't want to induce mistakes. However, you can induce these mistakes to cause permanent exon skipping. And that is what most people are using this for. And I'll show that here. So we have here a deletion of exon 52. We see 51 doesn't fit to 53, but 50 would fit to 53. So what if we could remove this exon 52 from the DNA? Then each time a copy is produced, exon 50 will be fit to exon 53. So each time a copy is made, this allows production of a Becker-like protein. So where with the AONs, you have to repeat the treatment because with time, this AON goes away and you need currently every week a treatment. This would be a one-time treatment and then you would have the effect permanently. So there's one approach using two scissors where you cut left and right of exon 51. Another approach is to cut here at the beginning. So this exon is recognized by the machinery that connects them because of the last piece here and first two pieces here. If you cut this, then the exon is there, but it's not recognized because there's a mistake here. And then while it's still there, it's not recognized. So still, again, 50 will be linked to 53. This needs only one scissor. And one scissor means it's probably more specific, and there's less chance that this will start cutting somewhere else where you don't want it to cut. So most people focus on this approach. However, this is still in the early phase. And you probably heard about genome editing because it's currently quite hyped. There's many opportunities. It got the Nobel Prize for chemistry. However, it didn't get the Nobel Prize for medicine because there's currently no genome editing approved therapy. It can induce targeted changes of DNA. So scientists are really excited because now we can do things that used to be impossible or really challenging. We can make model systems, and animal model systems, much quicker, and those that used to be impossible, we can make as well. And of course, if things go that easy, people start thinking, well, can we also use it to induce or to develop a therapy? Well, in theory, yes, we can, and it's possible in concept cells, it's possible in animal models. There's a clinical trial even ongoing for liver disease. So people tend to think, well, we are close to also doing a clinical trial for Duchenne. However, that is not the case because there's also a lot of buts. And the first one is delivery. So you need to deliver the scissor and the GPS not just to one muscle fiber, but like with the microdystrophin, to the majority of muscle fibers in the majority of muscles. So how would you do this? Currently, there's only one way, that is the AAV. But AAV is small. So the scissor fits or fills one AAV. So you need two AAVs, one with the scissor, one with the GPS, and then you get a dilution of effect. There's also safety concerns because with AAV, you will get production of the scissor all the time. And at some point, this is nice because you get cuts at the right place in the different muscle cells. However, the longer it's expressed, the higher the chance it will also cut somewhere where it should not cut. And because it cuts and there is AAV floating around, it's very likely, and this has been shown in animal models, that the virus DNA also ends up in the human genome, and that is of course not something that we want. So if you use lipid nanoparticles to express the scissor, that is much safer. However, the lipid nanoparticles can deliver to liver and not yet to muscles. And this is the reason why the current genome editing clinical trials target the liver and liver diseases, because there they can deliver the scissor code for transient expression. They cannot do that yet for muscles. So this is something to bear in mind. And I know that there are there's at least one approach where they have treated a Duchenne patient with a genome editing compound, and they claim that it works. But currently, there's no evidence yet whatsoever that it works, and more importantly, that it is safe. So there's no data from that patient available to show that it's safe or effective. So there's lots of things that have to be solved for Duchenne. So currently, the therapeutic effect to be expected is low. The dystrophin that will be produced is partially functional. So often you will see people saying, we correct the mutation with genome editing. Not for Duchenne, you only correct a partial functional protein. And the time of intervention will matter, because if you treat a patient who's already in his 20s and lost a lot of muscle function, that damage will not be undone. You will only hopefully slow down the rest of the disease, but the function that's lost will be lost. So people that say CRISPR cure, also that is not a correct term. And I mentioned already the specificity of this Cas9 enzyme. It will also cut where it shouldn't cut. And the problem is that it does this in the DNA, our genetic material, and there's no undo button. So that is why I think we really need to do a lot more studies to see how specific this is now, if this is. And then finally, a new system based on prime editors. And what these things do is they make a small cut, so not at both strengths, but on one strength. And what this can do is it can correct small mistakes, or it can make exons invisible. And the beauty of this system is that it's much less risky because there's no double-stranded break. It's a new system, so for now the efficiency is low, but I think for Duchenne, this would be a much more likely and safer system than the real genome editing with the double-stranded breaks. So what will happen in the future? People are working on improving the specificity and the efficiency of these scissors. If we want to induce deletions and larger deletions like multi-exon skipping deletions. And for these editors, so that the last part that I explained, these TIPEX, where you can cause a single strand break, there the efficiency has to improve a lot. And then a thing to discuss is, do you want to treat body-wide with all the risks of having untargeted cuts, or do you want to treat locally just in the muscle, where the only downside is then you treat just one muscle? But if a patient only has a few hand muscles or an arm muscle that they want to rescue, that might be an option, and that is probably achievable much quicker than doing body-wide delivery. And finally, something about combination therapy. So when I started, I said, well, it's good to know what happens when there is no dystrophin, because the muscle is damaged. And restoring dystrophin can prevent future damage or slow down future damage. However, it cannot undo the damage that has been accumulated. And also these dystrophins that we currently are restoring with microdystrophin gene therapy or exon skipping or genome editing, they're all partially functional. So I think what we need to go for is combination therapies. And we can either combine different dystrophin restoration approaches, and people are already considering doing exon skipping also for patients who've received microdystrophin therapy, or even better, to combine dystrophin restoration approaches with an approach aiming to improve muscle quality. And you may have heard that the Givinostat clinical trial met its clinical endpoint. So there was a phase 3 trial that showed that the treated patients did significantly better than the untreated patients on the 4-star climb test, and also on many other functional tests. So once that approach is proved, then you can start thinking, well, what if we combine something that slows down muscle deterioration combined with something that restores dystrophin? So in summary, it's possible to restore dystrophin now with exon skipping and AAV microdystrophin. However, for both, there's room for improvement, for efficiency for exon skipping, and for safety for the AAV microdystrophin. Genome editing is still in a preclinical stage. We have too little information on safety and efficiency. And likely what we will need to maximize therapeutic effect is not a single therapy, but a combination of different therapeutic approaches. And now that we get closer to approval of different types of approaches, also this becomes a reality in patients who hopefully then clinically can be treated with combination therapies. And even though there's many things that still need to be worked on and solved, if you look back to where we were 20 years ago, a lot of improvement has been made and a lot of advance has been made, and there's currently a lot of dedicated scientists to work on improving these approaches worldwide. So I'm sorry I cannot be there with you in person. If you do have questions, feel free to send me an email or to let Tali send me an email, and I would be happy to answer them via email.